Alrighty, welcome to another episode of One Last Cast podcast. My name is Jonathan, and as always, we have Merriel Solesky here. Say hi, Merriel.
Yo, how's it going? I'm not wearing a hat today, just a heads up if y'all haven't seen me without a hat.
Yeah, I barely recognized you.
Like, who's this new guy?
Yeah, who's this new guy? Well, it's our first kind of inkling of fall. We've had some really nice weather the last couple of days. Our first cold front just kind of came through this past weekend. And whenever you feel that first inkling of fall, everybody, including myself, and I'm sure yourself, go to kind of thinking about Flounder. And no, yeah.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, I immediately got kind of go to start thinking about Flounder, and it's time. And actually, if you haven't seen our Facebook page, which by the way, if you want to go look at it, we're live every other Tuesday at 7 p.m. At facebook.com/One Last Cast podcast, or on YouTube. Just search up One Last Cast podcast. We're live on there. But if you go to our Facebook page, you've seen our last couple of posts. The last week or so have been Flounder based, and we're just getting ready for that big Flounder run that I think is going to happen this year. But before we get into that, let's kind of give a shout out to our sponsors. We have Knock and Tail Lures. If you go to knockantaillures.com, and you can find all of their products they have on there. They're my favorite soft plastic. I'm sure Merrill's is one of your favorite soft plastics as well. Definitely going to be using them for this upcoming Flounder run. Ignore one of our last posts that Gulp is the way to go, because the Knock and Tail lure is another lure I am definitely going to be using for the Flounder run. So go to knockantaillures.com. Also want to give a shout out to Brittany Solesky, a realtor based here in Houston. If you're looking for commercial or residential real estate, give a shout out to her and contact her for any of your real estate needs. You can contact her at 281-740-0498 or an email at Brittany, BRITNEY, at grindstonereg.com. Also wanted to give a shout out to DSKA, Dirty South Kayakingers, as a Facebook group that is based out of here in Texas, and kayaking and fishing. There's a lot of good stuff on there. Go ahead and search that up and join up. And of course, Foray Printing. They do all of our custom merch here, such as our lovely One Last Cast podcast towels. Also, they not only do towels, but they do shirts, and I believe they do buffs as well. So if you're looking for stuff for merch or anything like that, give Aaron a shout, and he will hook you up. Merrill, you mind if I take this story? We have about Flounder.
I do mind.
You do mind?
No, I'm just teasing.
Okay.
No, man, yeah, Flounder stories, man. It's like when you say that, like at least 100 stories roll through my mind. Flounder. Well, go ahead. I'll let you tell your story.
Yeah. So this was back in, I believe, 2014 or 2015. I was really getting into fishing, and I like my days were kind of focused around my fishing. So I would, it's either I had class or I just go fish. It's just I just lived around it. My schedule was based around it, and I was figuring out this flounder bite back actually where a location we're going to be talking about very soon. But I was figuring out this location, and I found that there was this flat that was about 2 to 3 foot consistently before it dropped off into a channel that was about 8 to 10 foot. And what ended up happening was my buddy and I, we were working this flat constantly just because it was kind of along the way to where we wanted to fish. And we've always found redfish up here. And he put me on to spinnerbait and a ripple mullet as a trailer. And there's always redfish on this flat. You just get up on the shallowest part, throw your spinnerbait up there, and sometimes when the water is really clear, you can see your blade to flash, and it'll just disappear just because of just a redfish just come up and clobber it. And there's one day that I had a redfish on, and it kind of took me out towards the channel. It was like 24, 25 inch redfish, and I took a picture, put it back in the water, and I started fishing my way back towards the shallow part of flat. And as I was, you would basically, you let your spinnerbait hit the bottom. It was all shell right there. And you bring up your bait, and you could feel the vibration through your rod. you hear the as it comes up, and of course you have that. I had that the ripple mullet on the back, adds a little more vibration, and I just felt this massive thump. And it was very different from what I was feeling with the redfish because they would hit it and the redfish would run with it, and you just set the hook right away. This one was just a solid thump, and I instinctively just let it sit there, and I picked up the rod tip, and you just feel the weight just sit, kind of mushy, and I just set the hook as hard as I could, and peel and drag right away, and I saw this big old mud boil, and I'm like, okay, maybe it is a redfish, and I brought it closer to the kayak, and it started dogging me. You know how sometimes flounder are. They get closer to the kayak and they just go straight down. They didn't want to come up. And I thought, they started peeling dragging. I thought I had another nice redfish on. And it came up and it was this 5-6 pound flounder just fluttering right there. Um, and I
Let me guess. 22, 23 inches.
Yeah, no, it was short but fat. Just short and fat. And it was around this time. And I didn't have a net. And I tried to pull it up, and luckily I got my boga grip on its mouth, because right when that clamped down, it did a head shake, and that spinner bait just came flying right past my face,
Oh,
almost
close
hooked me in the
call.
face. Close call. But I pulled it up, and it was just this nice 5-6 pound flounder, and I'm like,
Jeez.
oh man, this is like one of the bigger ones that I've caught, um, especially on artificial at that time. And I was like, man, this is a big flounder. Are there flounder around here? So I told my buddy, hey, I think they're between the channel and up on the shallow flat. There's flounder. So we just started working the transitions. It was probably around like 4 to 5 foot, that area where it's kind of sloping up. Start working that. Literally every other cast, you would pick up a flounder,
Mm,
and all of them were just fat. They weren't. I think that 5 to 6 pounder was probably the biggest one that we had, but the
mm,
rest of them were solid 18 inches. 3-4 pounds. And maybe the occasional one that could kind of cut up there, but literally for all the way up until the end of October, it was just that pattern. You
right.
hit that as long as you had some tidal movement, you would hit that with that spinner bait and gulp, and it's just that it's an amazing bite because you're just feeling that vibration, and then you just feel a thump, and you just let it go, and you know it, and eventually what happened was we started picking apart that area, even on the shallow up against the banks. We started finding all these areas where there was just flounder sitting around, and that was probably one of the better flounder patterns that I figured out in that area. And I just really wanted to share that because it really got me into fishing for flounder during the run. Just because catching them artificial is just a rush. You feeling that big thump, and especially, which I think we'll talk about that later too. Especially if you get that thump right next to the kayak, and
Hmm.
you have to set the hook straight up. Oh,
Yes. That's
oh.
yes. Man, so like how like flounder like has rescued the day for me when guide fishing several times. So we'll be out there fishing and we're not catching anything. Like, and it's just like it's tough. We're looking at them, we're seeing them, but they're just not biting. And them flounder, man, they've saved my day a couple times. One time we had, I think we caught like 30 something flounder, and just this whole big old broad area. I remember when outriggers used to be open. I used to go to the that's how I try to learn the bite of a flounder. And man, those flounder in that little channel from outriggers, they would stack up by the hundreds. You'd literally just thrown out that I use gulp then. I throw out a gulp and just bump, 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 and the bite was like you'd feel it hit. So I had a sensitive rod, so I could feel it hit and then touch the ground. So it was like a doom doom. So it was like a double hit. So it'd come up, bite the bait, and then bring it down. And then sometimes it'd just be like you're reeling in, and it just feels like, oh, okay, I'm snagged, or I just hung up on something. Or sometimes it'd just be one thumb. But I definitely knew if it was like a thump and it stayed still, I was like, that's a flounder. And man, these little flounder, the little chip flounder would swallow that gulp whole. and they would just stack up in that outriggers channel. I think that's probably the most flounder I've caught it in one area, was that little area. And I was just standing on a little strip of a pier and maybe working up and down like the entrance to the outriggers where the water was. Um, that was a really good spot for me back in the day. And man, just that brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah, you
Uh,
know what that reminds me of? That
what
that Blue Dolphin Marina in the back.
I seriously thought you were talking about that flat when you said 2 to 3 feet and then it drops off to 8 feet.
Yeah.
I was thinking like you were talking about that channel.
No, I
Yes.
wasn't talking about, no, I wasn't talking about
Oh,
that one,
okay.
but so back whenever I was an intern at NASA, and I would right after work, I would just run all the way over to Seabrook, and I'd hop,
Hmm.
my stuff would be in my car, and that's where I would hop out and wade along those power lines back there. There was
Yeah.
so many flounder back there, and it
Yes.
would always be like back then I didn't use gulp at that time, and I was using like the Hackberry Hustler. I would
Hmm.
lose so many of those tails because they would just like hit the back and just hold on to the back, and you just rip it out of their mouth. But
Right.
um, just fishing that drop off, even when the water, I remember the one time where the water was so dirty, it was like it just rained, the water was horrible, and I didn't even think I was going to be catching anything out there. But when I got to that drop off, that tide was kind of pulled out, and I was just fishing it, and I felt every single little shell on there, and then every so often just a thump,
Yeah.
and you set the
Yeah.
hook, and it would be a nice flounder. Um, but
I
uh,
always knew the big schools were there by reading the mullet, what the mullet were doing back in that area. So when the big schools of flounder were there, which is this is about the season for it, the mullet would act a certain way. Like they'll be in tight balls or they'll be jumping or and then you'll just see bust, like bust, these flounder bust and that used to be one of my first spots that I wade fish too. Is that spot around the sign? How to
yep,
work around the sign.
yep,
Um, but the mud got really soft. Like the closer you got to it was the street back then, so it got really soft. So you had to be careful once you get back to that area
hmm,
because that mud was almost like quicksand. You'd sink straight down if you didn't keep moving.
yeah.
But the mud was nice, a little bit better up in the fronter area, but with the rocks, kind of you walk down the rocks and fish that area. But that was a good little spot. They haven't been like that for a while though, right?
No,
Like I haven't had.
it's been that area's been kind of dead, and I actually have no idea why. Because you have deep water access, it has all the hallmarks of a good location. For a little bit, I kind of figured out there was a good trout bite there for a little bit.
Yeah,
In some of the afternoons, there'd be some red schooling up along that shoreline.
right,
But it hasn't been like that in years, and
right.
I just don't know why.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, me
anyways,
neither. I haven't figured out that puzzle quite yet either.
yeah. So I know we kind of dropped a couple locations, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for some of our listeners who they're really everybody's excited about the Flounder Run. This is like one of the most people's favorite times of years, and sometimes people don't even fish all year until the Flounder Run. All they do is fish the Flounder Run, um, and I've definitely said it on the podcast before, but um, the run, when people think about the run, they're always thinking, a lot of people think about like Seawolf Park and the Galveston Ship Channel, and they'll line up shoulder to shoulder over there, and people be catching flounder left and right. So actually, and like I said, I know I've said this before, the Flounders Run is kind of already started, but on the northern parts of Galveston Bay. So probably around late August, September, they're already I think there's like some sort of internal clock. I can't really, I don't know how else to explain it, but they just know that it's they need to get ready to start moving. So around late August, September, up in the marsh, all these marshes, um, you and actually I'm sure you've seen the reports. People have been catching flounder really consistently all year long.
Right.
But around this time, they'll be catching up all in these marshes, up in these drains. They're feeding on shrimp and mullet and getting fattening up. And right now, we just had that first cold front. That's when they're starting to move from up north down. And the
So
reason why I can say that is because I've followed them down before, where um, you know to give an example, so one of the locations that I'm gonna name drop right now, um, is over in Trinity. I loved to launch out of Hugo Park back in the day, and that area, it's really rain dependent because if it rains a lot, it kind of kills the area. But whenever it hasn't rained, which it really hasn't rained that much recently, um, there will be trout up in there. There's redfish and of course flounder. And everywhere, every single turn that you find in there just looks like prime flounder spots. And some years, everywhere that you think there would be a flounder, there's a flounder right there. It's really really cool. Like every point that comes out, like there has to be a flounder there, sitting on the edge of the grass, and it drops, and like there has to be flounder. You'll catch one there, or you'll find these random pilings, you know,
Mhm.
up along the waterway there. You fish those pilings, you'll get a flounder. Every single drain, you'll catch a couple flounder. So it's just an amazing area up there, leading out into Trinity Bay, where of course everybody knows about like Jack's Pocket and all that stuff. You can't get to those areas by kayak just because it's just so far away. But along
Oh,
the way up,
we got motors now, so
yeah,
careful. Maybe you can't get there. No, I'm just kidding.
but yeah, it's just that area has been really good to me for flounder, and so starting up in that area, you have all these flounder. They're gorging on all these food, and then they'll start working their way down as the next couple cold fronts come through. And of course, this is all anecdotal evidence, so I don't really know exactly how like accurate it is, but it made sense based upon the data that I've collected. So they'll start up there, and then they'll work their way down, and you'll see them go down to like doing down towards Baytown, so like October. So the first week they're kind of moving out from that marsh, and the next couple weeks they'll be out at towards Baytown. So all those like houses out going towards Baytown, you fish every single one of those piers and you'll catch flounder. And then they'll go down even further, like Sylvan Beach, down
Mhm.
to like Seabrook, and then Dickinson, and then Texas City. I'm sure I'm mixing up the order of this somehow, and then eventually they'll make their way down to the
No,
Galveston Ship
you're not.
Channel.
No, that's right. That's the
Yeah,
right
okay.
order. Yeah.
Yeah, so, basically, as these fronts come through, you can kind of follow them down, and so, like, right now, if you're not hitting up in Trinity, um, you can start trying to fish around those pier pilings because they're just following those down. There's
Mhm.
just so much bait along those piers, and there'll be the flounder, of course, will be there, and it's going down, fattening up, fattening up, fattening up, and then they'll hit that ship channel where, of course, everybody loves their favorite location to Seawolf Park, where the
Yeah.
15-pound flounder lives or something like that. So,
Yeah. Or Texas City Dike, like when they run along
yeah.
those rocks or they get in those ponds. That's one of my favorite parts to catch them is Texas City Dike.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, that reminds me, and I'm sorry, it just reminds me of a story. I remember as a kid, I was, uh, back then I had to wait for my either my dad or my uncle to take me fishing. And one day we were at the Texas City Dike, had this really bad cold, not bad, this just cold front that came through, and we were on the channel side, and we just there's this it was it's like I forgot what trash can you say we had to count the trash cans, and at like the 31st trash can, that was where we usually like to set up. Don't know why, that was just where my uncle liked to set up.
that's
um
like on Texas City Dike on the channel side.
yeah, the right side if you're driving down it. So
Okay, I bet you Tom would know exactly where that's at. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I kind of got a general idea, but I bet he would know exactly where that's at. Like that's a little bit past that where it used to be. I don't know what the piers do. Like I haven't been to Tech City Dike, but there used to be a little shrimp, but or a shrimp boat that would pull up to a pier. I'm pretty sure that pier is gone.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it may still be there, and I know back in the day people loved to fish that, but it was just like I don't exactly remember if it's like the 31st or whatever it was, but it was like this random trash can number that I had to count, and we pulled in right there and we set up, and the front had come through, so the water's blown out.
right.
So and I remember like for some reason, like even though we're going to the dike, and I've never waded the dike before at that point, I had my waders with me. I think it was just to keep myself warm, and I
Hmm.
realized like, oh, the water is like really shallow right here. Let me hop out and start wading. So, and of course, every single time a tanker went through, I had to run back in because those
Right.
waves
Yeah,
were
that's
just,
what you say. Disclaimer:
yeah,
don't
yeah,
wade
yeah,
fish the dike unless you
yeah. You got to
know.
be careful.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like, I walked out there, and I was using live shrimp, and I remember like I had this my spinning reel, and I like backlashed it or something like that. And so basically, like I had just stepped off the rocks, and of course, right in front of the rocks is a little bit deeper before it kind of comes up a little bit.
Hmm.
And so I basically like just tossed my line, a few feet away from the rocks, and I was working on that backlash, and I finally picked it off with my spinning reel, picked up my line, and there's weight on it, and I was like, "Oh, I got stuck."
Yeah.
And I
Dang
kinda just, like
rocks.
yeah, I just kinda just, like, popped it, and it turned out to be, like, like a 16-inch flounder. I'm like, "Oh, there's a
Nice.
flounder." And then I was like, "Wait, that kinda makes sense because flounder like structure."
Right.
And so I started working from the rocks. I started trying to hop the rocks and try to drop down my shrimp, and I couldn't really work it right, or I didn't get any hits. So I ended up getting back in the water and casting parallel to the rocks and just dragging my shrimp through there, and it just started catching flounder. And it
Hmm.
was around October too. And the reason why I remember this is because later on I got even more brave and I like walked out towards like the drop off, and I got my first bull red wading.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah, I was catching like croakers and stuff like that, and I just tossed it out there, and right when it hit the water, like it
Dude.
just my rod just doubled over, and I set the hook, and it was just peeling drag, and I had like 1,000 size reel, so
Like,
I'm
oh my
just trying.
gosh, is it gonna stop?
Yeah, I was 12 or 13 years old at that time, and I was freaking out because I didn't know what to do.
Nice.
So, but
Uh,
yeah, there was a bunch of flounder just stacked up right against those rocks, and it was around this time. It was probably about mid October at that point.
mhm.
So yeah, they just follow. To go back to what we were saying, they just follow along from the north, and as these fronts come through, they just go down, and eventually hit the channel, and then they leave.
Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah,
pattern.
yeah, it's the when you mentioned that, like that's kind of like what happened to me, and it changed my game for like flounder fishing, right? Like I used to be one of those guys that threw away out there and try to work more area, and then I figured out like, man, they're right up on these. I was at Dollar Point, and there was this Dollar Point has a structure, and there used to be a sunken sail ship, and it had this structure that kind of went out. And back in the day, I'd wade fish by the pier, what used to be along the side of the pier, and I used to catch big ones there. But this time I'm in a kayak, and I'll chunk out towards it and try to work more area. And then I knew that when I chunked along the side, boom, I'd get hit. And then I was like, okay, well, let me do that again. And boom, I'd get another hit. I was like, okay, they're up against these rocks and or this rock growing on Dollar Point. And man, sure enough, dude, that changed my whole like little things like that make you think, and it changes your game when you're out there fishing. That the things that I used to do, I changed because I've learned to, being out in the water, and I, changed things. And then the more I did that, the more successful I was by fishing along structure along, and it all made sense to me because when I'd fish pylons, I'd fish alongside of them or in between them. Yeah, I know you all always see that one guy like bobbing, walking on the pier, not casting. He's just along the edge of it, bobbing, trying to catch a flounder. Boom, he hits a flounder, he reels down, and that's all he's doing the whole day. And he'll go over the same spot up and down the pier 5 6 times, and each and every time he'll catch a flounder, and he's like, he just fished that spot. And now
Yeah.
he's fishing it again, and he caught another flounder. So that Dollar Point was one of those things that changed my perspective on flounder fishing.
Yeah, and
Um,
actually, uh, yeah, I I think it was in the middle. Yeah, it definitely was in the middle of summer. A few years ago, I went with my uncle out to the 91st Pier,
mm-hmm.
um, because we wanted to go after Spanish mackerel. And we got there, and we had the cart, and we'd go into towards like the middle, and it was a weekday, and of course, like there's not that many people there on a weekday, but the people that were there, it was really funny. You'd see the people at the very end of the pier. There's like a bunch of people at the end of the pier, a couple people scattered in the middle, and then there was like nobody like the first 30, 40 feet of the pier, except for this one guy. And you didn't pay him any mind because we wanted to go towards the middle, and try to find a Spanish mackerel out there. And he literally was just dropping straight down off the pier. Didn't pay him any attention, and And then I was like, "Oh, we set up everything up, and oh, I left my lunchbox in the car. Let me go back and get it." And I was walking, and he was like, "Oh, I walked past him. I was like, how you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm doing okay. I caught a few flounder." "Oh, okay. Oh, wait, I have one." He's sitting there, and he's just like you can see like him bobbing his rod up and down. You can see the weight on it, and he just sets the hook. And I was looking over, and he was just fishing along those pilings right up against the beach,
Right.
and using live mullet, and he just pulls up this flounder, and it was like 16-inch flounder, and he opens up his cooler, and yeah, that's his limit. He already had his limit of flounder.
Was that
Um,
10? Was that 10 back then or
at the time, it was 5.
5?
So
Okay,
yeah,
not
but
2.
he had his limit, and I was like, man, I didn't know there's flounder. I didn't know there's flounder out here. Oh yeah, they're up against these pilings. All you need to do is drop some live mullet down there, and they'll hit it. So I went and got my lunchbox, came back, and he moved to a different piling. And I was talking to him again. I was like, "Did you get another one?" He's like, "No. Oh, actually, I just got a bite." He set the hook, and he got like a 16 incher, and they're just
Nice.
because if you look on clear days, around the pilings is a little bit deeper, just
Uh-huh.
around the pilings, so it's like you can see clearly, and then just a little bit darker right there,
Right.
and you just drop it right in there, and there'll be just some flounder sitting in there.
That reminds me of the causeway, and a lot of people don't know about the causeway. The causeway holds other than trout and redfish, it also holds a lot of flounder, and it does that right around the pylon. It sinks right there, and you can catch really nice. I mean, there's a lot of structure, so be careful. Unless you know how to dance around structure, you know, be careful because you're gonna lose a lot.
How
But
many jig heads do you lose on a flounder trip?
right, exactly right. But I mean, that's the biggest flounder I catch. Really, is up against the structure. There's some other spots I fish where you can barely walk, right? Because it's rocks and they're real deep. And I fished it with the egrets mix it or the voodoo shrimp, right?
Hmm.
It was, and man, you just work that voodoo shrimp on those rocks, and you know you're gonna. I mean, if you threw, you'd lose a jig head. You'd lose your bait if you threw. You cast it along that. But if you're on top of it bouncing, you might get lucky and not get hung up. But man, they just love being. Sometimes they're up on the rocks, and sometimes they're alongside the rocks parallel.
Yeah,
Uh,
and actually understanding that structure, especially the ones that are underwater structure, is really important to just really maximizing your time on the water. So over towards Pelican Island, right before you go over Pelican Island on the left side, there's this big sand like mound right there. Um, that used to be, if you look on Google Maps back in the day, that used to be a rock structure that would go out and it'd be submerged in the water. And a lot of people didn't really fish that, but my buddy and I kind of figured out that area, it was a really good trout spot with live croaker. Like sometimes they would be there, and we had really successful days on artificial, but there's some days they would not touch any artificial. It would just be croaker. But anyways, we went out there for the during like around October, November, whenever the flounder season was open, and if you were to cast your artificial lure up on the rocks, you wouldn't get anything. And you kind of had to feel around. This is where the rocks end because literally once the rock ends, that's it. It's just all sand at that point,
right,
and you had to work literally right up against that where that break was.
right.
Um, and if you got it there, you get a flounder. If you're off of it by like a couple feet, yeah, occasionally you'll get something, but it was rarely rare. Um,
So I got a question. Do you
yeah,
know? I don't know if it's true or not. I've actually only fished that area twice, and it was from a kayak. It was when you can launch from Texas A&M and not get a ticket if you went to school there or not. But if you were at Texas A&M, and don't go there when the current's strong, you'll get in trouble. And you go across to the other side, you used to be able to go on the sides of the highway, the concrete mounds, and stand on them and fish them. But you can also wade fish if you come up around the corner. I heard they blocked that off. Do you know if they blocked that off?
I'm under the impression that they did block it off, and especially now that they've done a little bit of uh, construction with that. There's a pipe that comes out now
Right.
on that side. So back in the day, yeah, people used to wade that area all the time. They would park like away from the Pelican Bridge and walk over there.
Mm-hmm. Right, right,
And
yes.
yeah, and they would just hop in and wade right there. But I don't think you're allowed to do that. Actually, I take that back. I've seen videos of people wading over there, but it's the area has kind of changed a lot because that pipe structure that comes out,
Right,
people love like wading up against that because structure,
right, right,
that's where the flounder would be.
right,
Um, so I take that back. I think people still wade over there. But again, from the kayak perspective, launching from Texas A&M, you can't really do that anymore.
right.
And that kind of sucks because that used to be a really good flounder spot too.
Yeah, yeah. I
um,
think I think people park on the before you go up and over to Texas A&M side. There's a parking area you could park there, and it was like a long walk to get there, or quote long walk to get
yeah,
there. Um, but yeah, I haven't fished that area, and I just heard a rumor that they may or may not close it. And it's crazy because they shut down flounder season certain times a year, and that was like the prime time that they were there in that one spot that people like to, other than getting elbow to elbow at Seawolf Park. That was one of the other spots that people like to fish when they get stuck up in the channel.
yeah.
Or not, I shouldn't say stuck, but when they're in the channel.
I got
Uh,
spooled over there before. Um,
that spot,
yeah, and I'm pretty sure it was a flounder because we were up on the bridge, like on the the walkway on the bridge, not the walkway. It's just sloping down. We were off of the bridge fishing that area, um, and we were having horrible luck. Had a live mullet on, um, and I was literally just slowly dragging the mullet through the water, and I felt a thump, felt like a flounder, um, and let it sit there, let it eat because this is like the only bite I had all day,
right,
and like a minute in, set the hook, and it just dead weight, and then I swore I felt like it unsuctioned itself and started
right.
swimming out towards it and started peeling drag, and I had it was with that my I had a 1,000 size reel, that's the reel I was using, um, and it was just peeling drag, and I could never just like I was afraid to break the line, and I just never like turned it, and it just kept going, um,
Right.
and I remember there's like it was a bunch of flounder season and nobody was catching anything, and I had to like go over people's rods and because it just got going out towards the middle of the channel, and I was like
Mhm.
running in and out and trying to chase it, and finally just got to the end of my thing, and it popped off. It could have been like a big black drum or something like that, but
Stingray,
it
big
could have
old
been a
sting.
stingray. In my head, I was a kid. It was a big flounder. That's what I tell myself. It was a big flounder.
So you mentioned 1,000 reel. Is that what you fish for flounder now? Is a
No,
thousand?
no, no,
No,
no,
no.
no,
Okay, all right.
no.
So
So
what kind of setup do you use now, and how did you progress to it? Like,
yeah,
what made you other like you went from 1,000? What made you think, okay, this like was there steps that you learned? Like, okay, I need this, I need to change this, I need to change that,
yeah.
and why?
I still use 1,000 size spinning reel on certain occasions, depending on what I'm doing. I like 1,000 size reel, just because it's small, and especially now that they have like braid, like 10 pound braid. It's really kind of the ultralight setup, but um, whenever I know I'm targeting flounder or really targeting any structure, just because 10 pound braid is not a cut it. Whenever you need to turn a redfish or turn any big fish away from structure,
Hmm.
um, um, and um, so I kind of switched over from from 1,000 to 2,500 size at one point, and I brought it up to like 20, 30 pound, and of course I eventually found that bait casters is actually better in certain situations for flounder, just because, especially from a kayak. And the reason why I say that, sometimes a flounder will actually follow your bait up, and then with the spinning reel you don't really have a good way to just like where you can with the bait caster thumb the spool and just free line it down,
Right, right,
release it to, and
right.
it'll follow it down, it'll hit it. Um, and a couple years ago, I actually caught like a 7.5 pounder doing that. Like
Ah,
I was literally over a drop off, and we were just fishing this drop off, and I brought up the knocking tail lure, and you just see this big old flounder just shape come up, and immediately I released the spool, and it went, and my bait just disappeared down, and the flounder just you could see the swirl, the boil on top, and it followed all the way down. And because I had my line and it was slack, I didn't even feel the hit, but I re-engaged the reel and I picked up my bait, and it was just weight. So like, okay, it has it. Um, and that's another thing now is that at the time I for kayak fishing, I love like medium action rods, just because like a medium action fast action tip, usually 6, 9 to 7. Um, and the reason why I like that is because it's so versatile. I can throw top waters with it, throw corkies, throw plastics, throw whatever with it. If I'm if I'm going with flounder has such bony mouths. You really need that heavy action, medium heavy rod to drive in that point,
That
that hook into
backbone,
the
right?
yeah.
You need the backbone.
Yeah, so luckily I found a cheap option that I found was those
Broomstick?
H2O,
No,
uh
a
yeah,
broomstick.
yeah, yeah, basically a broomstick, but it's like the H2O rods, the H2O Express or something like that, that was on clearance for like 20 bucks. It was like a 7 foot medium heavy action rod. Um, that's basically when I know I'm targeting flounder, that's what I'll bring, and it has, like, almost no give. And he just yeah, it went straight down, and I picked up the rod, and it was just there, and I just set the hook straight up, and actually, I almost that flounder, when I set the hook, it almost, because it was just suctioned onto the ground, the floor, the rod almost fell out of my hand when I set the hook, just because my
Oh,
hands were a little bit slick from, handling fish or,
right.
from before. Yeah, but it ended up being like the 7.5 pound flounder.
Oh,
Uh,
what did you get to measure that one?
yeah, it was a almost 25. It was
Oh,
almost
I was
25.
gonna guess 26.
Yeah, it was
26.
almost 25. But unfortunately, it was literally like November 2nd or something like that. It was like the day after like the season closed for flounder. So,
Oh man.
but I wouldn't have kept it anyways. But it was I remember that day it was a little bit tough, and eventually we figured out that they were just sitting on those little drop offs right there. But
So what size do you keep for flounder, and what size do you throw back?
usually,
Other than the regulation size, right? We know
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I
if
just
y'all
keep
don't know, we're in Texas, so our regulations, we do get people listeners from Louisiana and Florida, I believe, that I
yeah.
know of.
So it's 14 inches. I believe it's a minimum. Actually, let me confirm that because I don't want to give people wrong information. Uh, but it's we have a 5 fish limit, and and it's on all year except for November to December 15th, I believe. November to December 15th, you can't keep any flounder whatsoever.
So they're
Um,
gonna shut down the flounder season again this year for sure.
yeah, I'm under
Okay.
the impression that's going to be the case. Um, I mean, they gave us trout back, so that's something, right?
They gave the lower coast trout back,
Yeah, they
right?
gave the lower coast trout back.
Well, ours stayed the same, and I think they have another meeting about this trout stuff. So I think they want to bring down the numbers, which if that's fine. I mean, I don't know if you heard they had a meeting. I got I don't know if y'all get mail or whatever from these Texas Park and Wildlife, but they had a meeting about they want to have a meeting about the trout numbers if it haven't happened already. So it's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah, so the flounder limits for here in Texas is 15 inches with no max length limit, and it's 5 fish except for November 1st to December 14th, which is closed.
Okay.
Um, so that's our for flounder, and it kind of before it kind of gets away from me, I do want to give a shout out to Saltwater Survival Series. It's one of our major kayak tournaments series down here in the Galveston area. Their flounder tournament is October 28th. So if you're interested in joining a flounder kayak fishing tournament, actually it's not even kayak fishing. You can also wade. Just can't you can't be in a boat. So you can wade, walk in, whatever. October 28th. Just go to search up Saltwater Survival Series. Online, and you can find registration and rules and stuff like that there. Uh, Definitely a great tournament to be a part of.
Great
And
people run it. Some of my
yeah,
good friends run it. So
yep,
there's another tournament. Hopefully they have it again this year. Texas City Dike. They hold one. I think it's like a couple weeks or a month long, or during the flounder season. They used to have a really good, nice tournament. Hopefully, they have it again this year. And I
Yeah, and
think
that one's like a month
okay,
long or something like that.
yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
one's yeah, that's a really good tournament.
yeah. And of
But I
course,
think you have to catch it at the dike, right? Or
I don't remember.
the
I don't
rules are
remember.
there, so
Yeah,
just read the rules. But that's a pretty
and
big one.
and then of course, a week before the Saltwater Survival Series is the Who's Your Flatty Daddy. That one's actually the biggest one that we have down here on the Galveston area. Like thousands and thousands of dollars of payoffs. It's actually a really fun tournament. Um, it's very competitive though. So
Yeah, let's go get them Friday. Hey Jay, hit me up. I'm down to be out there Friday. But I might be focusing on something different than Flounder, if you're interested.
yeah, we have so this show right here is live. We're live every other Tuesday, so you can join us live on YouTube or at facebook.com/1 last cast podcast. Feel free to join us and chat with us. And we have a bunch of comments here. Curtis says that Jonathan plays tennis tournaments to catch flounder. Uh, actually, there's a funny story about that. So Curtis Chen, I actually met him whenever I was really into competitive tennis. He was a tennis director over at South Shore Harbor. They run their Ball Lunar Festival tournament every year, and I was there on day two in the semifinals or something like that. Lost my very first match, so I was out at that point. Um, but my parents just left me there, and we're like, "We can
They
pick
were
you up."
so disappointed. They're
Yeah,
so disappointed in you. They're like, just leave them.
my sister was in it, and she was playing. Basically, they were like, "Oh, we'll pick you up whenever your sister either wins or loses the tournament." She ended up winning the tournament, so we were there for like the rest of the day, um, on her division. But I lost, and I guess maybe in my head I felt like I was going to lose anyways because I brought my fishing rod, and they're out of South Shore Harbor, and I literally had like a freezer bag of like, dead shrimp, frozen shrimp. Um, and I was just like, okay, well, since I lost, I'm gonna just go walk around the pilings over here, the bulkhead, and I was just dragging this piece of dead shrimp around. And eventually, what ended up happening was that there would be little pinfish or whatever. They start taking chunks out of it, and I ended up seeing because of the way that I hooked it, the tail of the shrimp started swimming. It just started swimming in the water, and I was just dragging along the bulkhead, and I ended up hooking like an 18-inch flounder. Um,
Nice. There's really good fish in South Shore Harbor, especially this time of year. Curtis, I don't know if you know, there's a couple boats that sneak back there. There's a good, nice, good mud mixture of shell back there. I've heard stories of people catching their PB trout back there. I've caught the biggest sailfish I've ever seen, or sailfish, gaff top.
I'm about to
See,
say that's a tall tail
yeah,
right there.
yeah, yeah. I caught the biggest gaff top I've ever caught. I didn't even know they got that big. But yeah, there is very, very good fish back in South Shore Harbor. So catching an 18-inch flounder is no surprise for the people that know that little gem.
Yeah, but I caught this 8-inch flounder, and I was super excited, and I realized I know that my parents were like, "Oh, why would you release that fish?" Because I didn't have anything to keep it. I literally left my stuff there, so this flounder were just sitting in the sun on the bulkhead with my fishing rod and my bag of shrimp right there, and I ran back to the South Shore Harbor fitness center, asked them for a plastic bag. And I ran back and I put the flounder in a plastic bag, and I just carried it around with me for like another half an hour. Um,
Oh man, anybody else looking at you all crazy? Like, what is this guy doing?
I didn't bring it into the tennis center, so
Okay,
there's
all
that.
right.
But like, I called my parents like I got a flounder. You want me to keep? And they're like, yeah, keep it. So
Yeah,
we ended up carrying around this 18-inch flounder in a plastic bag. And whenever my
yeah.
parents picked me up, they got more plastic bags so they can put it in the car. So
Yeah, man, that definitely changed your calling there. You're like, man, maybe tennis is not my thing. Maybe fishing's my thing. Uh,
but
yeah, Justin brings up a good point. You want to read that or?
Yeah. So Justin here, just a comment to maybe stimulate some opinions. Um, I'm fortunate enough being able to stay on a good amount of flounder year round. Which, by the way, if you're looking for a guide, Justin Simpton, reach out to him. He's a great guide, and he'll put you on some fish. Um, he's fortunate enough to be on a good amount of flounder year round. Never have to wait and he never has to wait to set the hook for flounder. Um, let's see. Once he feels the thump, he sets a hook on it like any other fish. The thump is a very strong negative pressure sucking into the bait and lure and coming to dead stop. It's in its mouth. Um, yeah, I think for me, whenever I know I'm targeting flounder, and it's just probably because growing up, whenever I was first fishing for flounder with live bait, I was told that you have to wait like a minute, count to
You gotta,
60.
yeah, you gotta smoke a cigarette, drink a beer before you set the hook.
Yeah.
I heard it was by the time you smoke a cigarette, then you set the hook. That's one of the things I heard. I
Well,
heard the count to 61. I don't. I'm like Justin. I set the hook. Uh, Granted, sometimes I'll get a feeling that it's like I feel like it's not in his mouth right, and it's just a gut feeling, right? It's never like I know because I can't see, right? Maybe I'm working the bait too fast and he bit it on a fast retrieval, or maybe he something, and then I'll wait like maybe the most I've waited was I want to say 5 to 10 seconds. And what I do is I tap the rod tip, and if I feel like it's a little loose in there, like you feel it like nibbling, like he's still trying to hold on to it, and it's just a light feeling, right? And this is just a gut instinct. Like I'm not saying this is the answer. This is what I'll leave it there for a little bit longer, and I'll keep jiggling the tip till I feel like, or I keep like working the top of it. You know who reminds me of that? What's that guy that catches a lot of flounder off of Seawolf Park on the other side?
um,
Captain, Cap. I can't think of his name. He's like one of our biggest.
Tony.
Tony,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry, Tony. I forgot your name. I just got bad memory. I'm getting old. Forgive me, Tony. But Tony Kaplan, right? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, Tony Kaplan. And I watched him do the same thing. And I changed my game by watching his videos. Thank you, Tony, for your videos. He sets that hook so damn hard, and I start setting them that way. So, but I watched him as he worked the tip of his lure, and I do the same thing. Like I gotta feel him on there where I feel comfortable, and then I reel down. And I used to just set the hook and reel back or keep the line tight, but now I try to yank that sucker out of the water so that hook can get through his face if he has a bone. And I always use fresh hooks, fresh jig heads or whatever. I got to make sure that hook is sharp because if it's
Yeah.
not dull, that flounder face bone is going to test that hook.
Yep.
And
Yeah. And one thing that I've done is when you imagine, well, to go back to Justin's comment. So if I'm targeting flounder, I will actually, even with artificial, I will wait. Like if it feels like a flounder bite, I'll wait. And actually, what Tony does, and maybe it's something I subconsciously picked up, but now what I do is that whenever I feel that bite, obviously I drop the rod tip, um, and then I reel in the slack, and then I wait a little bit, and then what I'm doing in the meantime while I'm waiting is I'm picking up the rod tip and putting pressure on it. So to me, in my head, it simulates the artificial lure is simulating the bait trying to escape.
right,
So what end up sometimes I've actually felt where like they have it in their mouth and then you'll feel it like grab it again.
right.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. Like I say it's a gut instinct because you really don't know, right?
Yeah.
But you just feel like it's not good in there, right? It just feels like it's just not in there the way I want them to set that hook. There's been times where I set the hook and that lure came flying out of the water,
Yeah.
like in shallower waters. That sucker, like, oh man, it almost got me, or I missed. That's happened to me a lot. But sorry to interrupt, John.
No, no,
Go
no.
ahead.
And one thing that I've also picked up, and when it's again, this is just something that I imagine it to be true, just because of the way that I imagine that bait in the mouth. So of course the flounder, they're they're sideways, so if they open their mouth, it's not up and down; it's side to side. That's how they open their mouth. Um, and so whenever I set the hook, I never set up and down because if it's right in their mouth right there and it's up and down, you could just rip it out of their mouth and it's you won't get a hook in it. So I always like to set the hook at an
Uh,
angle.
so like a 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock and a 10 o'clock, right?
Yeah, yeah, like a 2 or a 10, maybe even sometimes like at a, a 3 and a 9,
Oh
you know?
wow.
Yeah, it's just depending on what it's even more important, especially in a kayak. Um, and, but that's just because of how I imagine, the bait is, and it makes sense because like you said, like I said, the mouth opens from side to side, so if you go up and down and you're right above that fish, you may not get that hook in its mouth.
Right.
Um, And
Well, yeah.
yeah, Justin's saying that he's caught a couple flounder where they're never really hooked on; they're just holding on to. Yeah, we've if you fish flounder enough, you've always had that happen. You'll see the flounder swimming in,
So,
get the net
yeah.
ready, and just opens its
Yes,
mouth, and
that's
it
what I was
just
gonna say. I was gonna say that. I always have the net when the flounder's there. I always have the net ready because that's happened when they open their mouth and then boom, your hook comes out. And man, I've caught them like that where I just netted them like, and I've missed them like that too. But I've always had that net ready right when it comes to kayaking to scoop them up right before he lets go.
yeah.
Actually, me and Daniel, we had that. Me and Daniel, what tournament we were fishing, Daniel? Me and Daniel were fishing a tournament, and that same thing. Daniel, Daniel caught one, and I think I netted him, and he spit the hook out in the net, or I netted him, or right. It was really close, so I don't remember how it was, but I was able to net him, and the hook came out.
Yeah.
But that was a good tournament. Yeah. Yep. We
But
should have won that tournament, Daniel. We just didn't. One of those tournaments where we caught winning fish and we didn't make it to the weigh-in.
ah, that
Yeah,
sucks.
those always hurt the most. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and I actually with with Jay on the chat here. So he's told me, and I've seen it. Whenever he's specifically targeting for flounder, he's using like 50-pound braid.
I
Um,
use 30. I'm using thick braid. I didn't
yeah,
even
but
say my setup for flounder, but yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, he's using like 50-pound braid. That way that he can really just set that hook without fear of it breaking. And he's just I've seen him. Actually, it's really funny. We were waiting over at one spot one time, and I had this flounder on, and it was just freaking playing with my bait. Like I kept missing him. It's literally like I felt the thump, and I waited for a little bit, set the hook, and it flew out, and I cast it over again, and he thumped it again, and
Mhm.
the same thing. He just pulled it out of his mouth, and Jay's like, no, 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 gotta. He put it over there. He felt the thump. Frick, first set the hook right away, and he just like completely ripped that flounder out of that water. He came flying out, and I'm like, dang.
That's funny. Yeah, yeah. I use so my setup is if I'm targeting flounder is a medium to medium heavy, and I'm using I always use I stuck to 30, 25 to 30 pound only because I've snapped. Me and Justin have snapped when me and Justin used to fish back in the day together a lot, which we don't. Anyways, um,
Hint, hint.
but yeah, hint hint. Man, I would always bust 20. Anything below 20, I was busting. I was snapping that line every single time. But then again, back then we were fishing like every day, maybe even twice a day. We had it bad back then. But yeah, it was so I just went to 30 and then that solved my snapping issues,
Mhm.
snapping and busting my line. And I don't know if it's the way I set the hook because when I set the hook, I might be setting it in a way that causes it to snap. I don't know, but I've snapped almost every braid out there. But anyways,
Maybe you had a nick in your rod. I don't know.
yeah, it was different rods, man. It's just I don't
and,
fish one.
and I know we're coming up on our hour that we try to limit ourselves to, but I definitely want to give a shout out for our people who do use live bait because live bait is people use live bait for flounder, um, and I mean, do you have you used live bait for flounder recently?
So when I went to Florida, oh yeah, I've used mullet before, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But I mainly fish artificials only because it's a hassle for me to keep live bait and then the whole like bait bucket. the aerator and all that stuff on a kayak is just extra work for me. When I'm like, man, I'm just gonna throw artificials, right? For me, that's just easier. Um, but going to Florida has changed my mind a lot about fishing live bait. So, I might explore with it next year or this year, fishing live bait. But like I said, it's always a hassle with the bait bucket, the aerator, and I just, to me, that's an extra 2 or 3 casts I can get in there and hopefully get them
Yeah.
on plastics.
Yeah. So yeah, and we Corey McCook here in the chat, he's like, you can really comb that water with artificial. Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Especially for flounder, it's all about working that water. Um, but on occasion, I do like to dabble with live bait just because it's fun. Especially like live croaker and trout and redfish. So that thump is really addicting. But
Right.
anyways, for flounder, um, for those of you who are looking to get into flounder this year and live bait is kind of your first foray into it, um, just look up a Carolina rig. Very easy to do. It's just literally a egg sinker to a swivel, 30-pound fluoro with probably a 2-watt kale hook. That's probably what I would use, and hooking the mullet. Live mullet's probably better. Mud minnows, they love mud minnows. Obviously, size your hook depending on the size of your bait. Mud minnows are usually a little bit smaller. You don't want to have a giant 2-watt with a tiny little mud minnow. Um,
So
but
it'll be dead right when you hook it.
yeah, yeah, basically. But usually for mullet, I like to hook it through the
Good.
lip. Yeah,
Okay. I was gonna say next
yeah,
question.
and literally, the egg sinker. I usually like to use a 1/4 ounce, but it kind of depends on where you're at. Like if you're in fishing over at Seawolf, you may want something a little heavier just because of the current there. You don't really. Really depends on what you're doing, because I've found in some situations where the flounder wants your bait to be naturally moving. So like a 1/4 ounce where it kind of slows it roll and lets your bait drift in the column, the area where you want to, that may be fine. But sometimes you just really want your bait to sit there and let the flounder come up to it and eat it. So just kind of depend on the area, but usually like a 1/4 ounce is a good all around weight. And most of the time, because I fish artificial and in a live bait situation, I like working the bait, so I'll just drag it, just sweep, drag, and you'll feel a
Stuff it
thump.
will pro cure. You ever do that?
I've
No,
never done that.
I'm just kidding. I
Yeah,
see that my buddy told me he did that, but I think he was joking. But he stuffed the mouth
so
full of, stuffed the mullet full of pro cure, and then threw it out there.
I know. So there's actually a couple people I know. When they'll during the flounder run, they'll use artificial lure like a chicken boy or even a gulp, but they'll tip their baits with like a chunk of mullet or something like that. I've seen that happen. Also, um, there's this like old guy that I talked to over. I believe, yeah, it was over in uh the uh the floodgates over at Moses Lake. Um, and he had a bunch of flounder on. This is back when it was like 10 fish, 10 flounder for a limit. And I was talking to him, and what he does is that he uses strips of croaker. Like he'll catch croaker and then he'll get the strips and he'll dry it out or something like that. And then it basically becomes like leather. Like he showed
Mhm.
it to me. It's like a little strip and it's leather. And then he'll put like whatever bait he has and he hook it onto there. And that one piece of croaker will last forever.
I've seen them where they use trout bellies. They use pieces of trout bellies,
Yeah.
and they put them just a tip though, just a little bit, and then he'll have like a old school cat too had a whole bag full of trout bellies or pieces of trout, and he'd cut off little pieces, have them ready to put on the hook,
Yeah.
throw that out there and with his bait and tip that, and yeah, he was pretty successful doing it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's I just can't wait for the really the big run to kind of kick off, because it just once they get down to the ship channel, it just becomes really easy. But like I said, right now, well, I'm already starting up in the Trinity era, and it's kind of they're moving, they're moving. So
So you're seeing Baytown.
Baytown's next. Baytown's
Okay,
upcoming. Yeah,
they're
but
coming down.
actually, to think about it, they're probably they're probably already in Baytown, because when you think about it, you have all that ship
Right.
channel that goes up. So they're probably already working their way down, and there's probably some already in Baytown
I think so.
working their way down. So
Yeah.
like
And
I said, my pattern is starting up at like the furthest reaches of Trinity and just working my way down. So
right.
but yeah.
Oh, cool.
So
Little treat for the guys. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, guys, I know we can probably talk flounder forever, but we're glad that it's getting cooler. That means that we can stay out in the water longer. It doesn't have to be 100 degrees and you sweat your butt off and it's already like 9 o'clock. So we can stay out in the water longer. Definitely want to give a shout out to our sponsors on the show, Knock and Tail Lures. If you're looking for a soft plastic that swims on the fall, has an internal rattle, one of the best soft plastics on the market, go to knockandtaillures.com and just find one of the three sizes they have, and you can't really go wrong. This one's my favorite color right here, this little chartreuse in white, and as well as plum chartreuse. So go ahead and get those. Also, get another shout out to Brittany Solesky. If you're looking for real estate here in the Houston area, looking for commercial or residential, reach out to Brittany and she'll get you hooked up with the property of your dreams. You can reach her at 281-740-0498 or at Brittany, which is Britney at grindstonereg.com. Also wanted to give a shout out to 4A Printing. They do our custom merch, such as our towels, which, by the way, I now that I see in my notes right here, definitely want to do a contest for this month. So I'm gonna right after this airs, I'm going to post up on our Facebook page at facebook.com/one last cast podcast. And it's literally just going to say, post up your flounder pictures here for a chance to win a prize package. So just post up a flounder picture that you like, share that post on your page, and you'll be entered to win a prize package, which the prize package would include one of our custom One Last Cast podcast towels. So like I said, be on the lookout for that. And also reach out to Aaron at 4A Printing for any of your stuff that you need made. And of course, DSK, Dirty South Kayak Anglers. Go to facebook.com and look up Dirty South Kayak Anglers for a great group of people talk kayaking and fishing here on the Texas coast. And before I forget again, Daniel wants me to give another shout out to the Saltwater Survival Series. October 28th. October 28th. Their flounder event. So go ahead and search up Saltwater Survival Series and get signed up for that. It's going to be a great one. Merrill, before we sign out, any last parting gifts of wisdom that you have for us?
Oh, why you always gotta say wisdom? I'm far from being wise. Oh man, not really. I'll leave the words of wisdom up for you
Oh, okay.
because I'm totally blank minded right now.
Yeah. So,
So my mind's like thinking, right? Like it's got my mind thinking, so my mind's on fishing right now.
yeah, yeah.
So I might just go hit up the water here shortly.
Oh, lucky. But my parting gifts of wisdom that I have is definitely be on the lookout for the conditions, especially now that these cold fronts are coming through. Pre-front fishing is awesome, and it's sometimes one of the best fishing that you can ever have. Just kind of keep track of where the front is. Even though even when I'm on the water and I'm fishing pre-front, I'm always constantly checking that weather, just because if that front gets there a little bit quicker than I'm anticipating, I need to be ready, because sometimes you're a mile, 2 miles, 3, 4, 5 miles away from where you launch. You need to prepare so that you can have time to get back and not get yourself caught in any unfortunate situations. Um, you know, 20, 30, 40 mile an hour north winds is not fun. So
Yes.
um, just be on the lookout for that. And yeah, just have that on top of mind. I want to thank everybody who has joined us on our chat. You can join us every other Tuesday at facebook.com/one last cast podcast, or on YouTube. We're also on YouTube. You can search us there. And our next episode, we'll probably really get into fall fishing. I think this year is just going to be amazing. We've had so little rain in drought conditions that I think that fall bite is just going to be fire. So maybe we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
That's right. All right, bud.
Anyways, it's been the One Last Cast podcast. Thanks everybody for listening. Tight lines, and you guys have a good one.
Take care, guys.